Hello, I'm Peter Rosenbaum. I'm a developmental pediatrician at McMaster and CanChild, and I'm here with my colleague Kim to talk today about the F-word function.
And I'm Kim Machette. I am the manager of Info Peel and Service Pathways at the Child Development Resource Connection Peel.
This webinar is one of 7 that we're presenting on the F-words in childhood disability. These are meant to describe how the F-words can be used with children from the ages of 0 to 6. And they are designed to provide a broad, strengths-based approach to children and to child development, particularly in the context of children who have challenges. But we believe these words apply to everybody. They're based upon the World Health Organization's International Classification of Functioning Disability and Health, also known as the ICF, and its framework. And to know much more about everything we're going to talk about today and in this whole series, we hope that you will look at the paper we wrote some years ago called The F-Words in Childhood Disability. I swear this is how we should think. And you'll be able to find that by going to the CanChild website, www.canchild.ca/F-Words. Well, the F-word function, as you see, fits into the World Health Organization's concept of activity. And what we think is so important about this word is that activity refers to the execution of a task or an action by an individual. It doesn't talk about whether somebody does things nicely. And what is so important, first of all, in thinking about child development and thinking about the various ways that children do things as they're learning, and thinking about children with impairments, that they may do things in different ways. They may, for example, be left-handed. They may not hold their pencil nicely. We don't care about that as long as they can do the activity they want to do. The other part of this idea that will be talked about separately but is important because it's linked is the notion of participation. And participation is not only doing things, but doing things that are meaningful to the person who's doing them. And that's a very important idea because traditionally we've just paid attention to whether or not you can do it, not why you do it or whether it's important to you. Okay, what do we mean by function? Function refers to what people are doing, and I like to think of these as the ING words. Activities of daily living, brushing our teeth, eating, sleeping, talking, and so on. When we apply those activities in contexts that are meaningful to us, such as going out for dinner with friends, then the eating becomes part of participation, and that is an activity in context that's meaningful to me.
So moving forward, when we're speaking of function, let's keep in mind the ability to execute these activities, the function for a purpose, moving towards participation, focusing on getting dressed, how we get dressed, not the end result, but how do we get there.
One of the things that's really important to emphasize about function is we're not talking about normal or typical function. I often use the example of people being left-handed, and that is different but not abnormal. The ICF does not ever talk about normal function. The ICF talks about function. It doesn't say how things should be done. Function is about a way of doing things however they are accomplished by you, by your child, that is successful for them and meaningful for them.
In addition to that, we speak about what is normal. What is your normal? What has your baseline been? Think about it in the fact of a baby going from drinking from a bottle, then to a sippy cup, using different grasps. All of a sudden, grasping a sippy cup would not be normal. Keeping these things in mind, what is normal versus participation and the function of the behavior.
I'd like to add a comment to that because what Kim's comment makes me remember is that we think about rehabilitation, which is what I need after my stroke to help me get back to my previous normal. But when we're talking about children, we need to be talking much more about child development, about how children are doing things, and not thinking about this as rehabilitation, because we're not returning them to a former state of function. Let us add just another comment about the idea of normal. And this is an idea I think we should get rid of, quite frankly, because although it can be a guide to what might be happening in terms of the next steps in development or how things are done, it is almost never the only way things are done. And there can be a real tyranny, and parents, I think, experience this, when they think that their child has to do something at a certain time or in a certain way, when there's enormous variation in both timing and the way in which things are done.
And often we hear the quote, "I put my pants on one leg at a time." And it always makes me wonder, do we? Is that something we actually do? I watch my son get dressed in the morning with not undoing a zipper, not undoing a button, 2 at a time, zippers done up, taking on and off, and I thought, is this the normal way of doing this? And then I watched his father do the exact same modeled behavior. Not a button is undone, not a zipper is undone. What is one leg at a time versus normal?
As we have commented on before, how things are done isn't so important, and we like to remind people about how typically developing children learn. They crawl, they pull the stand. Most of them crawl, some of them don't. They eventually pull the stand. Some of them walk holding onto the furniture for a while. Some people, like this young child, push a stool around for a while until they get enough balance and enough confidence to let go. And the achievement of the activity is what's important, not whether it's done normally. We also have to recognize that children are in a constant state of change and development, and something that may be difficult for them today or this week may become very easy later on. So we've got to be careful not to be tyrannized by children having to do things, not to tyrannize children, quite frankly, and not to be tyrannized ourselves. The children have to do things in certain ways. Let's take the bigger picture of whether this is in the process of happening, rather than whether it's happening beautifully today. One of the things that we like about the ICF is that it reminds us to think about both capacity and performance. Capacity is what we can do at our best. And when we assess children in the clinic, we often assess them in circumstances that will allow them to show us what they can do. And then we may be surprised that they aren't actually doing that as well, as often, as nicely in the community. And that reminds us to think about what factors in the environment, physical environment, the attitudinal environment, how crowded things are, and so on, what things might be influencing what a child actually does that's different from their best capacity.
I think along those lines, we need to be mindful of environmental factors when using phrases such as "she can't do this," or "she can't do that," or "she won't do this." Is it that she can't, or is it that she won't? Two very different things.
And if I may add then one thought, this is where parents are incredibly helpful to us, because they can describe what their child can do at their best. And that then gives us, educators and clinicians and so on, an idea of trying to understand what might be interfering with best performance as observed by the world's expert on that child, the parents. If we use the example of a child with cerebral palsy and think about function, we recognize that everybody with cerebral palsy has in common problems in motor control. But the goals that we set, the goals that they set, are going to be very different depending on what they can do and what they want to do. And therapists must focus with the family and with the child wherever possible on functional goals that are relevant to that child's environment and to the things they want to do, and not just aim for best capacity because we've seen them do it in the clinic.
I believe that comes into effect as well when you hear a lot of families struggling with, I hear the school says they will do this, but they won't do it at home, or vice versa. I believe at home the family's saying that they're doing this and not at school. When the goals are set for capacity and performance on the environmental factors, once they're displayed, I feel that you will get a higher understanding of what the capacity is for each child in each environment.
Another example that we might want to think about is parents of children with cerebral palsy want their child to be able to walk. And that is often a major focus of the intervention, certainly by the physical therapists. What I want to know is whether the child can get around and explore their environment. And in talking with parents, I will find out what the child can do. For example, are they crawling? Are they commando crawling? Are they trying to pull up to stand? Are they cruising around the furniture? Are they using their mobility to explore? And if they're not, or if they're having trouble with that, then it's certainly reasonable to think about talking about wheeled mobility, either as another way for the child to get around, or perhaps for some children, the primary way they're going to get around. What the wheeled mobility does is it liberates the child to enable them to have more access to their environment. So not only are they not confined to their wheelchair, they're liberated by their wheelchair.
And I think sometimes we need to be mindful of making sure that the person that we are building the plans for are inclusive in our planning. There was a very young woman who was speaking about a wonderful group of professionals who was supporting her in her plan. And they wanted to have her as inclusive as possible with all of her friends. And what her friends were doing at the time were hanging out on the couch and watching TV and just having some hangout time. So part of their plan that the professionals decided was to take her out of the wheelchair for those moments so she could participate and sit with her friends on the couch with everybody else. So she laughed at the end of the day and said it was fantastic to sit with them. However, halfway through, I needed to use the restroom. And I, at that point, had no way of using the restroom. I had then had to ask my friends to help me, support me back into my wheelchair so that I could go to the restroom, and then no longer felt as inclusive as possible, as you can imagine. So although she appreciated the piece of the inclusion, she wants to be mindful, wants us to be mindful when planning that the wheelchair is part of her exploration process. And sometimes that is things to be thinking about in the future of planning, is to make sure you're not planning, and she quoted the not about us without us philosophy, making sure that the intention is there, but also the execution.
Another illustration of the idea of function is this quote from this 5-year-old child who said, using an adapted bike for his mobility function, my mom and I finished our first triathlon with lots of other kids my age. Is that the usual way kids do triathlons? Perhaps not. But how many people watching this have done a triathlon? This boy has done so. Another one is, we took this opportunity to prove so many people wrong and had fun doing it. And this is the parent of this child commenting on what they had probably been told their child wouldn't ever be able to do. It's worth paying attention to what we say kids won't be able to do, because they'll prove us wrong every time.
Absolutely. And something we keep in mind is the phrase complete, not compete. And a discussion I have with many families is using a baseball analogy and stating, when you're in the major leagues and you have a series of errors that lead to a home run, is it not still a home run?
One of the parents in the CanChild parent group, parents participating in research, told the following story. Sometimes it's the smaller things created that have the biggest impact. Being able to participate in making snowballs this year with very little help from me makes one happy girl. Our usual goals are things like working on standing and walking and being able to be independent in her chair. But sometimes something that would seem so small, like making a snowball, is just remarkable. There are no words to describe such joy for all involved to see and experience. That's the end of the quote. And I would just add that when parents and grandparents and other people see a child being capable in the face of their impairments, everybody sees that child differently and has a better appreciation of who they are and what they can do. There's a program in Ottawa called Active Start, and it is aimed at helping kids develop functional skills like walking, running, jumping, throwing, kicking, and catching. There are multiple game stations that allow children to try different activities, And what's so important there is for them to find what they like, what they're good at, what they don't like, and then to be able to build on those activities. Those activities may need to be adapted for kids who might want to do things differently or need help to do them. But the fact that they can do them is what's important to the kids. They have a sense of competence and achievement, even if they do it their own way. People often talk about adding technology to enable people to function well, and I like to remind parents and my colleagues who are resistant to that idea that we use it all the time. I'm wearing glasses. That's an augmentative intervention that allows me to see well. Think about how often we give kids training wheels on their two-wheel bicycle when they're learning to ride the bike. They might need the training wheels for a week, a month. They might need it all season. Most kids don't need it for life, but it allows the kids to have balance and develop their confidence and their competence and their skill. And when they, and if they don't need the extra help later on, we take it away. But we use it for regular kids, and we should be absolutely comfortable to use it with kids whose development is challenged in some way.
And I believe, Peter, as well, we see this in school systems and community programs with assistive devices, where they're using technology to improve the communication of the children, such as they use eye gaze systems, Tech Talk, Kurzweil. You even think about it in the everyday world of language, we use interpretation as well. And when you're thinking about sports, you're thinking of hockey versus sledge hockey or basketball versus wheelchair basketball. I think it's very important to include this in individual education plans at school, to talk about exactly what you said. Start at a baseline of where you are, and it might be the training wheels, and then as long as you keep a baseline and you keep improvements, you may not need them, but if you do, they're there to improve the communication and facilitation and therefore participation.
Thanks for watching. We hope you found these ideas useful and challenging. We have said before, and we'll say it again here, if you have ideas or questions or challenges for us, please let us know, because we will learn from people's uncertainty or from people's disagreement with our ideas. We think getting the task done is important. We're less concerned with how nicely it's done. We want to hear from you if you have ideas for us. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today.